My boyfriend cheated on me with my best friend from high school. Here's how I found out and what I did next. Hey Reddit, I'm Lily, 25, and I'm going through the worst time of my life. My boyfriend of 2 years, Ben, 27, cheated on me. But it wasn't just with anyone, it was with my best friend from high school, Megan, 26. We've known each other since we were kids, inseparable throughout high school and beyond. And now, everything's fallen apart in a way I never thought possible. My trust in both of them is shattered, and I don't know how to move forward. This is the story of how I found out, how I confronted them, and how I'm slowly trying to rebuild my life from the wreckage they left behind. I remember the first time I saw Ben at that party 2 years ago. It was one of those nights where I almost didn't go. I'd been having a long week at work, stressed out over a huge project for a client that had a ridiculous deadline. All I wanted was to curl up with a blanket and binge-watch old sitcoms with a glass of wine, but my friend Lauren convinced me to get out of the house. "Come on, Lily," she begged. "You need a break. You've been working like crazy, and you deserve to have some fun." Reluctantly, I agreed. I threw on some makeup, slipped into a dress, and headed out, feeling like I was forcing myself to be social. But when I walked into the crowded apartment, there was something about the atmosphere that made me feel alive again. The music was loud, people were laughing, and the air buzzed with energy. I felt myself start to relax as Lauren handed me a drink and introduced me to a few new people. That's when I saw him, Ben, standing across the room, casually leaning against the wall, talking to a group of friends. He wasn't the loudest or flashiest guy at the party, but there was something about him that drew me in. Maybe it was the way he smiled, like he had a secret, or the confidence he carried without seeming cocky. I found myself stealing glances at him, wondering if I should go over and introduce myself. And then, as if the universe had decided to intervene, we ended up standing near each other at the drinks table. I awkwardly reached for a beer just as he did, and we both laughed, our hands brushing together. "Great minds think alike," he said with a grin, holding out his hand. "I'm Ben." From that moment, I was hooked. We spent the rest of the night talking, and I was blown away by how easy it was to be around him. He wasn't like the other guys I had dated, he was thoughtful, funny, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. I found myself opening up to him about my job as a graphic designer, about my love for travel and art, and he listened intently, asking questions that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. We exchanged numbers before I left the party, and I couldn't stop smiling the whole way home. I didn't want to get ahead of myself, but something told me that Ben was special, that this could be the start of something real. And it was. Our relationship moved quickly after that. Ben and I went on our first official date the following week, dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant where we spent hours talking and laughing like we'd known each other for years. The chemistry between us was undeniable, and before I knew it, we were spending every weekend together, going on spontaneous road trips, exploring new restaurants, and just enjoying each other's company. I felt like I had finally met someone who understood me, who made me feel safe and loved. 8 months into our relationship, we decided to move in together. It felt like the natural next step. We found a cute little apartment downtown, and decorating it together was one of the happiest times of my life. We painted the walls together, went to flea markets to find quirky furniture, and filled the space with photos and memories. It was our little home, and I thought it was the beginning of the rest of our lives. Ben was good with my friends too, especially Megan. I had known Megan since we were 15 years old. She was the first real friend I made when I moved to town in high school. We clicked immediately, bonding over our shared love of music, movies, and the fact that we were both total book nerds. Throughout high school, we were inseparable. We had sleepovers almost every weekend, spent hours on the phone gossiping about boys, and even made plans to go to college together. But after high school, our paths diverged a bit. Megan moved to a different city for college to study law, and while we stayed in touch, our friendship wasn't quite as intense as it had been. Still, when Megan came back to town after finishing law school, we tried to pick up where we left off. She started coming over more often, and I introduced her to Ben. The three of us started hanging out, and at first, it was great. I loved seeing my best friend and my boyfriend get along. It made me feel like I was building the perfect life with the people I loved most. But as time went on, I started to notice little things that didn't quite add up. Looking back now, I can see how I missed the warning signs. It's funny how easy it is to ignore your gut when you don't want to believe that something's wrong. But those little red flags, the ones I brushed off as paranoia, are glaringly obvious now. It started with Ben becoming more secretive with his phone. Ben had never been the type to hide things from me, at least, that's what I thought. We were one of those couples who were open with everything. He used to leave his phone out on the table without a second thought, and I never had any reason to be suspicious. But about 6 months ago, things started to change. He was glued to his phone more often than usual, always texting or scrolling through something. And whenever I asked who he was texting, he'd shrug and say it was work-related. At first, I didn't think much of it. He worked in finance, and I knew his job could be demanding, with clients needing updates at all hours. But then I started noticing how he'd lock his phone the second I walked into the room. Or how he'd angle the screen away from me when I sat beside him. There was always an excuse, always a reason for his sudden shift in behavior. But something about it didn't sit right with me. It was the same with Megan. After she moved back, she and I fell back into our old friendship routine, texting each other almost daily and meeting up for coffee when our schedules aligned. But Megan wasn't just reconnecting with me, she was also getting closer to Ben. It wasn't unusual for her to text me about random things, but then she started texting Ben too. At first, it didn't bother me. Megan and I were like sisters, and it made sense that she'd become friends with my boyfriend. I thought it was great that the two people I loved most were building a friendship. But then Ben started bringing Megan up more often in conversations, random things like, "Oh, Megan suggested this new bar we should check out," or "Megan sent me the funniest meme today." It was subtle, but it started happening more frequently. I told myself it was nothing, that they were just friends, but the pit in my stomach grew with each mention of her name. I tried to ignore it. Megan had been my best friend for years, and Ben was the man I loved. They wouldn't betray me like that, at least, that's what I kept telling myself. But the signs were there, and I was too blind, or maybe too trusting, to see them. One night in particular stands out in my memory. Megan had come over for dinner, and we'd spent the evening laughing, drinking wine, and reminiscing about high school. After dinner, we all settled on the couch to watch a movie. I got up to grab a refill on my wine, and when I came back, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. Ben and Megan were sitting a little too close on the couch, their legs almost touching. And Ben had this look on his face, a look I hadn't seen him give anyone but me. It was a look of longing? Affection? I didn't know how to describe it, but it made my stomach turn. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. I didn't want to be that insecure girlfriend who reads into every little thing. But that moment stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind, even as I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. The more time passed, the more those little things added up. Ben and Megan started texting each other more frequently, and there were moments when I'd catch them exchanging glances that felt off. But every time I brought it up, Ben would laugh it off, saying, "Come on, Lily, Megan's like a sister to me. You know I'd never do anything to hurt you." And because I loved him, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. So I pushed my doubts aside, telling myself that I was overthinking things. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The day I found out about Ben and Megan will forever be etched into my memory. It was a Saturday morning, and I had woken up feeling relaxed and excited for the day. Ben and I had plans to meet up with friends for brunch later in the afternoon, and he'd gone out early to run a few errands. I stayed behind at the apartment to catch up on some freelance design work I had been putting off all week. It was one of those quiet, peaceful mornings where everything felt normal, at least, until my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen to see a message from Lauren. It was a bit of a surprise because we hadn't spoken in a few weeks, and I figured she was just checking in. But when I opened her message, my heart immediately sank. "Hey, are you and Ben okay?" That question set off alarm bells in my mind. Why would she ask something like that out of nowhere? I frowned, feeling a knot form in my stomach as I typed out a reply. "Yeah, why?" Her response came a few minutes later, and when I read it, it felt like my entire world stopped. I saw Ben and Megan together this morning. They were at the cafe on Main Street, and they looked really close. Like, closer than friends. My hands started shaking as I stared at her message. What did she mean by really close? Why hadn't Ben mentioned meeting up with Megan? 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they had just run into each other. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed my phone and texted Ben. "Hey, where are you?" His reply came quickly, "Just finishing up some errands. Be home soon." I stared at his message, feeling my stomach drop. He hadn't mentioned Megan at all. Why would he lie? Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and drove to the cafe Lauren had mentioned. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and my mind was racing with a million worst-case scenarios. What if Lauren was right? What if Ben and Megan weren't just meeting for coffee? The thought made me feel sick. When I pulled up to the cafe, I saw them immediately. Through the large front windows, I could see Ben and Megan sitting at a small table near the back, their heads close together. They were laughing, and Megan had her hand lightly resting on Ben's arm. The way they were looking at each other, it wasn't the way friends looked at each other. It was intimate. Familiar. And in that moment, I knew. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My entire world came crashing down around me, and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to storm inside, to confront them both, but I couldn't move. I just sat there in my car, staring at the two people I trusted most in the world, realizing that they had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The drive back to my apartment felt like a blur. I don't even remember how I made it home. My mind was spinning with disbelief and hurt. How could Ben and Megan do this to me? How long had it been going on? How had I been so blind? By the time I walked through the door, I was shaking. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest, and I didn't know what I was going to say when Ben came home. But I knew I couldn't let this go. I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and there was no denying it now. About an hour later, Ben came through the door, acting like nothing was wrong. He was holding a bag of groceries, a smile on his face as he walked into the kitchen. "Hey, babe," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "You ready for brunch?" I couldn't even look at him. My stomach churned with disgust, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "How was coffee with Megan?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. He froze, the smile falling from his face. "What are you talking about?" "I know you were with her," I said, standing up and crossing my arms. "Lauren saw you. So don't lie to me." For a moment, Ben just stood there, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, yes, I met up with her. But it's not what you think. We're just friends." "Friends?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Do friends lie about meeting up? Do friends look at each other the way you two were?" Ben's eyes widened in panic. "Lily, you're overreacting. Megan and I are close, but it's not like that. You're blowing this way out of proportion." But I wasn't buying it. Not anymore. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the way he avoided my gaze. My heart was pounding in my chest as I felt a wave of anger wash over me. "Are you sleeping with her?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ben flinched, his face going pale. "No, of course not. I would never. Don't lie to me." I screamed, my voice cracking with emotion. "I saw the way you looked at her. Don't treat me like I'm stupid, Ben. Just tell me the truth." For a long time, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at the floor, his jaw clenched. And that's when I knew. The truth was written all over his face. "How long has this been going on?" I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks. "How long have you been lying to me?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," Ben said quietly, his voice filled with regret. It just happened." My heart shattered into a million pieces. The man I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with had been cheating on me. And with my best friend, no less. I can't believe you, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak. I trusted you. I thought we had something real. I'm sorry, Ben whispered, his voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you. Get out, I said, my voice cold and hard. I don't want to see you. Get out. Ben tried to argue, tried to explain himself, but I wasn't listening. The pain was too much. The betrayal was too deep. I couldn't bear to look at him any longer. When he finally left, I collapsed onto the couch, sobs racking my body. The man I loved, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, had betrayed me. And the worst part was that Megan, the girl I had trusted with my secrets, my dreams, my life, had been part of it. In the days that followed, my world fell apart. I could barely eat, barely sleep. I felt like I was living in a fog, going through the motions of my life without really being present. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of Ben, his clothes in the closet, the photos of us smiling on the fridge, the little inside jokes we had shared that now felt like cruel lies. I couldn't escape the pain. I hadn't told anyone what had happened yet, not even Lauren. I felt too humiliated to admit that my best friend and my boyfriend had been sneaking around behind my back. How could I explain it? How could I put into words the depth of the betrayal I felt? I spent most of my time curled up on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, trying to numb the pain. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the thoughts kept creeping back in. I kept replaying every moment of my relationship with Ben, every interaction with Megan, searching for the signs I had missed. Had it been obvious? Was I just too blind to see the truth? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not just at Ben and Megan, but at myself. How had I let this happen? How had I trusted them so completely? I felt like a fool. A few days after the confrontation, I got a text from Megan. I had been dreading this moment, knowing that eventually, she'd try to explain herself. I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity before opening the message. Lily, can we please talk? I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to explain. The sight of her name on my screen made my stomach turn. Part of me wanted to ignore her forever, to cut her out of my life without a second thought. But another part of me, an angrier, more curious part, wanted answers. I needed to know why she had done this to me, how she could betray me after everything we had been through. I finally agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near my apartment. My heart was pounding as I walked in, scanning the room for her. When I saw her sitting at a small table near the back, my chest tightened. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting in her lap, her eyes downcast. When I sat down across from her, the silence between us was suffocating. For a few moments, neither of us spoke, the weight of the betrayal hanging heavy in the air. I'm so sorry, Megan said finally, her voice trembling. I know what I did was unforgivable, and I hate myself for it. I never wanted to hurt you. Then why did you? I asked, my voice cold and hard. Why did you go behind my back with Ben? She looked down at her hands, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know, she whispered. It just happened. We got close, and I don't even know when it crossed the line. One minute we were just friends, and the next. The next what? I snapped, my anger boiling over. You decided to sleep with my boyfriend? You decided to betray me? Megan flinched at my words, her tears falling freely now. I'm so sorry, Lily. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to know that it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. A mistake? I repeated, my voice shaking with rage. You don't accidentally sleep with someone, Megan. You made a choice. She didn't say anything after that, just sat there, crying quietly. I felt a wave of conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal. But most of all, I felt the overwhelming realization that our friendship was over. The girl I had trusted with everything had become someone I didn't even recognize. I can't forgive you, I said finally, my voice cold and steady. I don't think I ever will. Megan nodded, wiping at her tears. I understand. And with that, I stood up and walked out, leaving her behind. As I stepped out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of closure. The chapter of my life that had included Megan and Ben was over, and I had no intention of looking back. The days and weeks after cutting ties with Ben and Megan were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. There were moments when I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the weight of the betrayal was too much to bear. But slowly, I began the process of rebuilding my life. The first step was moving out of the apartment Ben and I had shared. It was too full of memories, and every time I walked through the door, I felt suffocated by the ghost of our relationship. I found a new place, a small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that was all that mattered. Moving into that apartment felt like a fresh start. I painted the walls a bright, cheery color, hung up new artwork, and filled the space with things that made me happy. It was a slow process, but with each new addition, I started to feel more like myself again. Work became my escape. I threw myself into my design projects, taking on new clients and pushing my creativity to new limits. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over something in my life. My work was mine, and it wasn't tainted by Ben or Megan's betrayal. It felt good to focus on something productive, something that reminded me of my own worth. Lauren became my lifeline during those difficult days. She checked in on me constantly, making sure I wasn't isolating myself. She'd show up unannounced with wine and takeout, dragging me out of the house for impromptu girls' nights or forcing me to go on long walks to clear my head. She listened patiently as I vented my frustrations, never once making me feel like I was a burden. Therapy helped too. At Lauren's urging, I started seeing a therapist to work through the pain and anger I was feeling. It wasn't easy to open up at first, but over time, I began to process the betrayal and understand that what had happened wasn't my fault. Ben and Megan's choices were a reflection of them, not of me. One of the hardest parts of healing was learning to trust again. For a long time, I kept my guard up, afraid of getting hurt again. I questioned everything and everyone, wondering if I could ever really trust another person with my heart. But as the months passed, I started to realize that not everyone was like Ben and Megan. There were good people in the world, people who wouldn't betray me. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from while I was wrapped up in my relationship with Ben. We started going out more, having dinners, going to concerts, and just enjoying life again. It felt good to surround myself with people who genuinely cared about me, who had my back no matter what. It's been almost a year since I found out about Ben and Megan, and while the pain hasn't completely faded, I'm in a much better place. Looking back, I can see that the experience made me stronger. It taught me that I'm resilient, that I can survive even the deepest betrayals and come out stronger on the other side. I've learned to forgive myself for not seeing the signs earlier, for trusting the wrong people. It took time, but I've realized that I wasn't to blame for what happened. Ben and Megan made their choices, and those choices had nothing to do with me. I was enough, even if they didn't see it. I haven't spoken to either of them since. From what I've heard, they tried dating for a while, but it didn't last. I'm not surprised. Relationships built on lies and betrayal rarely do. Now, I'm focused on myself, on my career, my friends, and my own happiness. I've learned that healing isn't linear, and there are still days when the hurt resurfaces, but those days are fewer and farther between. I'm proud of the progress I've made and the person I'm becoming. I've even started dating again, slowly but surely. It's been a journey learning to trust again, but I'm open to the possibility of love, even after everything that's happened. I know that I deserve to be happy, and I won't let what happened with Ben and Megan define my future. Final update: finding strength and moving forward. Hey Reddit, it's been a long, painful journey, but I'm finally in a better place. I've moved on from Ben and Megan, and I'm focusing on myself, my career, my friendships, and my own happiness. It hasn't been easy, but I've learned that healing takes time, and that's okay. To anyone who's been betrayed by someone they love, just know that you can get through it. It's not easy, and there will be days when it feels like the pain will never end, but it does. And when it does, you'll come out stronger, more resilient, and ready to take on whatever life throws your way. Thanks for listening, and here's to new beginnings.